Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley broadcasting from Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of Friday, the 9th of October, 2015. And there is a policy fight in Washington, D.C. It's between the war psychotics, who are spreading war psychosis, on the one hand, and some sane forces that have emerged in the Obama administration. These are the realistic, or at least more realistic, thinkers. But just to set the stage, a death threat against Obama. Again, small drone crashes near White House despite ban against flights in D.C. And I'm reading from USA Today, 11 o'clock in the morning, on October 9th. Today, U.S. Park Police confiscated a drone that crashed on the ellipse. That's right behind the White House. You can see it from the back of the White House, near the White House on Friday, and issued citations. And the rest of it is baloney. Is the main thing is, if you were sitting there, you would read that as a threat. And we've had this repeatedly with Obama. My personal guess is that this has something to do with the general posture of Obama, of course, to be sure. But one of the things that seems to have riled up the warmongers, the strange loves, and boy, do we have them. The strange loves are not happy with Obama's press conference of last Friday afternoon. Now, I couldn't cover it because it was happening at pretty much exactly the same time that we were taping this program. But in the course of that, Obama talked about mumbo jumbo, that people who are telling him to go into the Syrian conflict, or quagmire as he sees it, and it certainly would be. And he says, I ask these people what happens after that. Suppose I have a no-fly zone. Suppose I have a safe haven. And they respond with mumbo jumbo and half-baked ideas. So the war psychotics, and we know them, the neocons, the humanitarian bombers, the one-trick ponies, the chicken hawks, they're going with the usual tissue of mumbo-jumbo and half-baked ideas, and they know who they are. For example, we pick up the Washington Post of this morning, Friday, October 9th. Here we have a distinguished op-ed in the middle of the page, countering Putin. There's no mystery behind Russia's motives in Ukraine and Syria. Condoleezza Rice, dripping with blood, dripping with human blood. And Robert M. Gates, that cold guy, basically sending people to their deaths, right? Spreading violence all over the world from behind that farm boy persona. That's the thing that he's always used. And here we see, for example, the question of the half-baked ideas. We have to create our own facts on the ground, say Rice and Gates. We have to create our own facts on the ground. No-fly zones and safe harbors for populations, read terrorists, read ISIS, are not, quote, half-baked ideas. So they're quoting Obama. They don't exactly mention him, okay? They mention him in the article, but that's a very interesting quote. That one has rankled because that's the kind of, stupid excuse for thinking that these neocons and humanitarian bombers have been using. So now let's take a look. Let's talk about some of the more insane ones, and then we can say something about what we now, I think, know to be a faction fight in the White House, in the administration. Interestingly enough, the National Security Council and a guy called Robert Malley, coming from the International Crisis Group originally, some kind of a leftist. This guy's coming out of the Soros humanitarian bomber camp, but seems to have evolved. These institutions, designed by Machiavelli, interpreted by John Adams, and somehow then refined over time, they have this ability to grab hold of people and make them change. And you come in there with a bunch of insanity, and eventually it mellows out, and then something else can emerge. That would be, I think, my guess with Robert Malley. You can read about him in my book, Obama, the Unauthorized. biography. But let's listen first of all to the chorus of war psychotics. The first one, of course, is Zbigniew Brzezinski in response to the fact that Russia has sent these 26 cruise missiles on the previous day from the Caspian Sea, 3 corvettes and 1 frigate, but they pack a punch with these Kaliber cruise missiles slamming into various sites, and where every time they mention this, they got to whine, yeah, but some of them crashed in Iran. Well, so what? And even that is denied, right? So what's your fail rate anyway? What's the fail rate on a Patriot missile? So the situation proceeds with Zbigniew Brzezinski saying, well, the fact that Russia has attacked some terrorist rebels that have been trained by the CIA, Al-Qaeda members, Nusra. He says, that's got to be casus belli. The United States has to go to war to defend Al-Qaeda. Well, maybe he feels this, he's the father of Al-Qaeda after all, right? He created it, along with Gates. Zbigniew and Gates were the 2 guys who set up Al-Qaeda with Osama bin Laden back in 1980, 81, during the Afghan war. So Zbigniew says, those Russian forces out there in Syria, they're at the end of a long supply chain. They're dangerously isolated. We could easily disarm them, and he puts that in quotes to signify that what he's really saying is destroy them. Well, Ivo Dalder, another former diplomat dealing with Moscow, says, yeah, you could destroy them, but then you'd have to game in the Russian response. Man, oh man. Imagine the Russian response to the destruction of 50 planes and several thousand forces. This would essentially blow the lid off the world. Hold on to your hats. Are you really going to incinerate your family in a thermonuclear fireball for the sake of some lousy, and literally lousy, terrorist rebels in Syria from Al-Qaeda that you've been told did the 9/11? I don't share his view in general, but that's what you've been told. That's what most of these people believe. And then, of course, ultimately the goal is to save ISIS. So Zbigniew Brzezinski should be spending more time with his family. Why doesn't he take his daughter on a vacation and get her out of there? We've also got Hillary Clinton burnishing her warmonger credentials, if that were necessary, by calling for a no-fly zone and a safe haven for terrorists. Mumbo-jumbo, half-baked ideas. We've also got David Ignatius. My heavens. David Ignatius, usually the calmer wing of the State Department. We're also picking up a vibe that the State Department is now seething with the desire for a safe haven and a no-fly zone. He writes today, same edition of the Washington Post, corralling our objections in Syria. David Ignatius, Washington Post, today, Friday, the 9th of October. What about safe zones in northern and southern Syria? He goes on one better. Not just a safe zone in the north to keep open that famous 65-mile corridor, but we've got to have a safe zone in the south so you can get aid in from Jordan and other places. That still seems like a good idea, so long as they're established as corridors of humanitarian assistance and revived public services rather than an armed U.S. or Turkish military intervention to help the rebels. Well, lots of luck with that. At the same time, though, he says the United States has lost the chance to make Assad's departure a precondition. Now, the worst of all of these, in terms of the most dangerous right now, is Ashton Carter. He looks so much like Carter. Ashton Carter must go. Fire Ashton Carter. He's a sign of fire. You're Ashton. Get out of there. You're a warmonger. Out. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, the military psychotics, the militarists, the neocon fascist madmen, the humanitarian bomber hypocrites are all mobilized. And this is a sad story. We've discussed Zbigniew Brzezinski who says, if you touch a hair on the head of an al-Qaeda terrorist in Syria who claims to be pro-democracy and anti-Assad, the U.S. goes to World War III to defend those terrorists. My thesis in politics for quite a while has been the crisis of the U.S. ruling class. The U.S. ruling elite is clinically insane. They have lost their moorings in reality. They are incompatible with the survival of this country. When you're going to reform anything, even before you start with campaign finance reform, as some people seem to think is the top priority, you've got to change that ruling class. There's got to be a way to kick some of these people out so that they can spend more time with their children, to you create a special resort in the Bahamas or something that they like, and let them go there. Give them scholarships, right? Give them stipends, whatever it takes. Get them out of government. These people are insane. So David Ignatius, again, usually reasonably, in touch with the State Department, he's also, I forgot to mention, right, with David Ignatius, not only does he want the safe zones and the no-fly zones in northern and southern Syria, but he also wants to make a deal with al-Qaeda. And here he says, the Pentagon needs to assess why the overt public U.S.-backed program to train moderate terrorist rebels has failed, right? Only 4 to 5, according to General Austin, have come forward. But there's also the CIA program, and this time Ignatius, usually speaking for the State Department, but now for the CIA, says a better bet may be the CIA's covert training program, whose fighters can make tactical battlefield deals with Jabhat al-Nusra. It means al-Qaeda, without publicly allying with it. So you have plausible deniability. But you're dealing with the ones that you claim did 9/11. Isn't that amazing? What do the 3,000 families think? Are they asleep? Are they awake? Are they in dreamland? Are they in the dream time? So that's pretty shocking. Countering Putin, this is the talk of the town with Condoleezza Rice and Robert Gates. One can hear the disbelief in capitals from Washington to London to Berlin to Ankara and beyond. How can Vladimir Putin, with a sinking economy and a second-rate military, continually dictate the course of geopolitical events? Whether it's in Ukraine or Syria, the Russian president always seems to have the upper hand. And they go through this usual idiotic jargon. He's playing a weak hand very well. The U.S. is playing a good hand very poorly, all idiotic, all superficial, all so choked with cliches that the mind is never engaged. And then they go through a scenario of the responses. Putin's primacy, it's a sign of weakness by Putin, or he'll regret it, he'll be in a quagmire, or this will make a bad situation worse, or maybe the Russians can help us. We know what to do. The policy here, just to state it in the middle of this parade, is a condominium with Russia. In other words, certainly a condominium in the Middle East. The U.S. and Russia agree that certain outcomes are going to be necessary, and these will be imposed. And this will include Syria, where the Turkish-Syrian border will be closed, and the existing jihadis, this concentration of lunatics and butchers in the ISIS genocide cult, they will be shut down. They will be dispersed. They will be dealt with. And at the same time, we can also look forward to other policy changes. Stop the insanity of trying to overthrow Assad. Work with existing governments. Issue a very stern warning to Erdogan that his days as the secret chief of ISIS are over. Intolerable. So those and some other things would tend to expose the heart of the matter is that ISIS is a paper tiger. in spite all of that hysterical propaganda. ISIS is 10 feet tall. They have supernatural powers. They're the masters of the internet. They know how to use Facebook. They know how to use Twitter. They know how to use Snapchat and Instagram and all this stuff. They are a rather obvious rabble. They're a paper tiger. The only thing that keeps them going is comprehensive, seamless support from NATO through Turkey, that airlift of jihadis out of Libya and into Turkey and therefore into Syria. All of that is necessary. They've got to be allowed to sell the stolen oil on the international market. So all you need is actual attack. All you need is to start dealing with them, and they begin to collapse. The bombing by now, I suppose, is essential because you want it to go fast. But the main thing is to close that Syria-Turkey border, the 65-mile gap, which is now, it's coming in for a certain kind of attention. So work with existing governments. Dump the myth of the Arab Spring. You look at this Nobel Prize that's just been granted to the quartet from Tunisia, the 4 representatives of civil society who allegedly saved democracy in Tunisia. I don't really comment on Tunisia, a place that I've been to several times. But I think the reason that the oligarchs, right, the Eurogarchs, the old money Eurogarchs who dominate the Swedish Academy. Remember, the Swedish Academy is the intellectual branch of Riddarhuset, the equestrian order. In other words, the knights, the feudal aristocrats of Sweden, working through Riddarhuset, have said, we want to keep the myth of the Arab Spring alive. Your choice in Syria is Assad or chaos. You had the same choice in Iraq. It was Saddam or chaos. You chose chaos. And in Libya, it was Gaddafi or chaos, and you chose chaos. And underlying the entire thing, a condominium of the United States and Russia, where in the Security Council the U.S. can bring France and Britain kicking and screaming, and the French will scream louder because they feel that they're losing out. Their policies have left them. And Russia brings along China. Notice, Kaczynski wants to ally with China against Russia. No. It's better to do this with Russia. That's the true American policy. Back to the minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now you've got to keep up with everything on Tarpley.net. That's where you can find my Twitter. You can find my books. Later in the program, I'm going to talk about the Mormons. I got to talk about Jason Chaffetz in case he becomes Speaker of the House, which is not likely, but it's too close for comfort. And the question of polygamy. Ron Paul wanted to deregulate marriage and bring in polygamy. That was his gesture to Mitt Romney. And we have Chaffetz as somebody. I guarantee you, if you get Chaffetz in the speakership, you're going to have polygamy, and that's a very ugly thing. That's barbarism here in the United States. So you can find books like that, Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. So all of that is there. And you can also find our daily briefing, the Tax Wall Street Party morning briefing, to which I am a contributor. You can find that there, and you get your free subscription. Go to Tarpley.net and click on the thing that says, give me a free sub, send me a free email sub in your inbox every morning. You don't have to go looking for it. We send it to you. So that's all there. And very, very soon we'll have the film of my appearance at the National Press Club on Monday evening. This was the Capitol Hill Civil War Roundtable. Very well attended, packed house. This was a version similar to the C-SPAN lecture that I had done on the anniversary, right on September 24th, 1863. I had the honor of giving, I think the only or maybe the main lecture on this, on the 150th precise anniversary of the event. Unfortunately, because of technical considerations, then I couldn't have the slides. But this time we had an ample slideshow, and I think the people found that highly interesting. So let's look at now this situation. The gist of what I was saying in the previous segment is that Putin has had the intelligence to see that ISIS is in effect low-hanging fruit. ISIS is a paper tiger. ISIS is the rabble. ISIS is not even the junior varsity. It's the intramural, the inter-club teams, and so forth. So he can go in there, and with a relatively modest effort, he can get a tremendous result. Because the only thing holding up ISIS was Allen and Erdogan and their phony war policy. Pretend to bomb ISIS, but don't do it. One of the Russian spokespersons this week said the U.S. was bombing the sand. They were dropping the ordnance, or not even dropping it. They were simply flying back. The Russians have been running 20, 25, 30 sorties per day with the planes that they have. Yesterday, for example, 22 Russian sorties, 27 targets hit. The Allen phony war, as I was constantly pointing out, was way down to 5 or at most 10 when we needed 1,000 bomber raid. You could do that, concentrate a bunch of planes in the Middle East and then do the job in a couple of weeks, and away you go. That was what they did to Iraq at the early part of the 1990s. And by the way, the Caspian warships are continuing to contribute to this. So they've moved some rocket launchers to an equestrian club, I guess a stable, near Hama, and that is now being used to clobber the terrorists in the area. And of course, this entire argument that you've got to bomb ISIS directly is false, because what you've got to do, first of all, is stabilize Assad, stabilize the Syrian army, because if that collapses, your situation then becomes dire. You've got to do everything possible, first of all, to make sure that Assad forces stay in the field, that they are stabilized, that they can even begin advancing, that you relieve the pressure on Damascus and the Latakia area. In other words, the Latakia to Banyas to Tartus, of course, right, where the Russian modest base, but nevertheless an important base, is located. So all of that is what they're doing. And this idea that you've got to go and bomb ISIS first is wrong. Then there's this idea that Assad is trying to destroy, the Russians are trying to destroy the wonderful moderate democratic terrorist opposition, and then there'll only be ISIS, and then everybody will have to clobber them, and then Assad will win. Well, sure, because those forces are indistinguishable. There are no democratic moderate terrorist rebels. There simply are none. It's a legend, as Russian spokespersons have also been pointing out this week. So these are some of the aspects. But now we got to get to this Ashton Carter. The big demand this week from this program, let the word go out from this time and place. Fire Ashton Carter. He's a strangelove. He's a madman. He's a pompous ass. He is a fool. He is a warmonger pedant. That's the Rand Corporation talking, okay? That's precisely Herman Kahn, world targets in megadeaths, and the guy is a prize fool. Get him out of there. For example, he is essentially endorsing terrorism. There's no other way to put it. He is threatening Russia, saying that Russia, if you persist in supporting Assad, if you attack these wonderful terrorist rebels that the CIA has provided, there will be consequences. This is one of the front page items, one of the top items here in the Washington Post. He's also crazy in the sense that he says that Russia is isolated. Ashton Carter, this is the Brussels meeting of NATO defense ministers yesterday, Thursday, October 8th. Ashton Carter says, Russia has continued to wrap itself in a shroud of isolation, and only the Kremlin can decide to change that. What does this mean? They've been invited by Syria and by Iraq, by your own puppet government, is now breaking away and saying we get a better deal with Russia. This is precisely why you want to have a bipolar world, so the third world can maneuver and get a better deal. It remains our hope, says Carter, that Russia will see that tethering itself to a sinking ship is a losing strategy. Well, this is simply insane. And I think it's anti-war, where you can find some of this stuff. That one of their headlines is Carter, Defense Secretary, is essentially threatening Russia with terrorism. Can you believe it? U.S. Defense Secretary predicts terror attacks on Russia is the summary on this website, and I think that's accurate, and that is also the scuttlebutt in the corridors of Mons and Brussels. He predicts that Russia will face reprisal terror attacks on Russian soil because of these military actions. One story on this is from the London Guardian. Russia will pay price for Syrian airstrikes, says U.S. Defense Secretary. This is a threat to use CIA terrorist armies, CIA secret armies, ISIS and Al-Qaeda against Moscow. This is playing with fire. This man is a lunatic. He's got to be fired. He's a quackademic. He doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't got a clue. Ashton Carter predicts reprisal attacks on Russian soil over Vladimir Putin's military campaign to prop up Assad's regime. So that is a threat. We also have Stoltenberg is also making threats. And let's also put it in context. Saudi Arabia has in effect declared jihad against Russia. There is a declaration out of holy war by a group of 40 to 50 benighted clerics, right? The ulema, that have said, we're waging holy war against Moscow because what they're doing to us. The jihad has sounded, and NATO is piling on. Look at those facts in front of you. Fire Ashton Carter. He's too close to the terrorists. We got rid of Allen. We got to get rid of this guy. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, the 9th of October. Follow it all at tarpley.net. There's a daily briefing up there, and you should read it. It's compendium, it's concise, and it's what's going on. So look, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, coming at a time when the U.S. ally, at least from the regime point of view, Saudi Arabia, is making these threats. He seems to be joining in. And the story we have there is you have these religious scholars, right? Again, the ulema, the experts, and they've been issuing fatwas aplenty calling for jihad. Now, I guess the Saudi government has not exactly formally declared war on Russia, but this is the effect. This is going to be big. And again, you have to ask yourself, look at your children. You want them dying for the degenerates of the Saudi Arabian monarchy? Surely not. You want to die because some guy like Carter, a warmonger pedant, a prize fool, has tied his career to this? So anyway, that's the article here in the London Guardian. Russia, of course, continues to point out that they are destroying the infrastructure of terrorism. And their national interest is quite simple. They don't want ISIS and Al-Qaeda, for that matter, to survive and be able to come onto Russian territory. There's also a question now. Remember the issue we had in July, August. Will the Patriot missiles that were moved into Turkey to defend Erdogan against the Syrian Air Force, will they be removed? And the question then was, von der Leyen, the German defense minister, had said, we're going to take those out because you're not using them against any kind of ISIS. You're using them against the Kurds. And the fact that you've got the Kurds weakened is actually helping ISIS. So why should we defend you when you're making our lives more difficult? Remember, the subtext of all of this is the refugee crisis in Europe and the tremendous pressure on the German government, the CDU, Christian Democratic Union, Christian Social Union, CSU, on Merkel at her party conference this past week. Stop the flow and put an end to the Syrian civil war. Now let's look at the faction fight. there is a faction fight, and this comes to the fore, first of all, in an article it's from Bloomberg and dated today, Josh Rogan and Eli Lake. And the idea here is White House is weighing a Syria retreat. What do you mean retreat? It would be an advance into the land of sanity, retreating from the land of lunacy and raving psychosis. That's no retreat. That's progress. So the idea now is, isn't it time to be realistic enough to say, let's work with existing governments, and that happens to be the government of Hafez Assad. Thesis that I have supported since October, November 2011 and my visit there, if not sooner. So what's the lineup? It turns out that the people who are saying we've got to de-escalate the conflict while keeping Assad in power, because that's obviously the way to do it. How else can you de-escalate if you're going to have chaos any other way? So this view, the keep Assad in power while de-escalating and deconflicting, White House National Security Staff, including the senior coordinator for Middle East policy, Rob Malley, and this is this guy who came from the International Crisis Group, and he had a somewhat dubious pedigree, but still, there it is. And this also meshes with somebody that we haven't heard too much about, Stefan de Mistura. De Mistura, and I covered this when it all came out, right? There was a study written that talked about the need for local ceasefires, local armistices. And de Mistura has been doing it, going around and setting up local truces, local peace, local deconfliction, and going on. But now, the National Security Council view is opposed by top officials in other parts of the government, especially Secretary of State John Skull and Bones Kerry and U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, her loopiness, this humanitarian bomber, the one who weaponized human rights for purposes of her own genocide. All right. Now remember, this takes us back to April 2014. You remember when, after Obama had said, no, I'm sick and tired of going into these wars. I'm not going to do it. You remember this article, I think the Wall Street Journal, where Kerry and Samantha were reaching out to warmongers outside the administration to try to increase the pressure on Obama, and this was leaked. David Petraeus was one of those. Now, it's clear Petraeus probably said, look, I'm too smelly right now. I'm just coming out of my Broadwell phase. You know, I've just been wrapped with what amounts to a felony where most people would have been in jail for a few years. I can't do it, but I'll get you my friend Allen. John Allen can be the ISIS czar. And then on the other side, they also went to General Keane, Jack Keane, which is the this Institute for the Study of War. It is the Kagan faction, right? Donald Kagan, Frederick Kagan, Kim Kagan, that entire crew of neocon fascist mad persons. So here's a fight. We have all kinds of people weighing in. We'll give you a synthesis of this. Frederick Hof, this Hof, I think, is the State Department guy who apparently thought that the way to get peace was indeed to accept Assad, right? So this is Malley is for this, and Philip Gordon has written an article about it. The Philip Gordon article, I think, is in Politico a little while ago. And Philip Gordon, the previous NSC director on this portfolio, says pretty much the same thing. Now, let's see who's against it. We want to mention a couple of the main names. Other officials told us that while the U.S. still has programs in place to aid the moderate terrorist opposition, top members of the administration who have been pushing for more of that support or for the establishment of safe zones in Syria are increasingly frustrated with the White House's reluctance. Maybe they sent a drone to take that message to Obama. This group includes Kerry and General John Allen, the outgoing special envoy of the anti-Islamic State coalition. So Allen, as we identified correctly, is, along with Kerry, one of those who are frustrated and they're trying to sabotage Obama's policy. Now I ask you, if you're a libertarian, if you're a Paul-tard, if you're a mushhead wouldn't, but a LaRouche, you're going to be attacking Obama from morning till night. So I hope you get your engraved thank you note from Kerry, Samantha Power, and indeed Allen, saying thank you for making our warmonger task easier. Obama's speech, press conference last Friday, no more mumbo-jumbo and no half-baked ideas. Now, there are some promising ideas in the U.S. bureaucracy. Let's see if we can just sum up a couple of those. There is now the idea that you could attack Raqqa, that the U.S. seems to be promoting what was going on at the end of July already. Try to have an attack on Raqqa by, I think, Kurds. It looks like essentially the Syrian Kurds going in to attack Raqqa, the ISIS capital. There's also more and more focus on this critical area, the 65 miles west of the Euphrates, because that's the Royal Road, right? That's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's the artery where all the sinews of war come into ISIS. You cut that, ISIS withers on the vine. It's a rabble. It's the JV intramural JV. How about that? And it's a paper tiger, so crush it. Wouldn't crush it. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and now we have something out of the ordinary. We are now going to go to Moscow and get a report on the view of Syria and the Middle East from the Russian capital. And our guest is Stanislav Bishok, who is, first of all, one of the leading scholars in the world on the problem of neo-Nazism and fascism in Ukraine. He's the one who knows most about the Kiev fascist clique, and his institutional location is the International Monitoring Organization, which is known as CISEMO, Commonwealth of Independent States - Election Monitoring Organization. We've had him on in the past, and he's a friend of the program. So, Stanislav, welcome. Can you tell us now how the Russian government, the Russian elites, the Russian people view this situation? And we have to say at the beginning, we want to congratulate the Russian armed forces for showing that with a certain force, you can then actually break up ISIS. You can break up these other terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, Nusra, whatever they are. Please tell us all about it.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me on your show once again. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. And Russian public as well as Russian elites are predominantly supportive of the actions taken by the Russian military in Syria, and Russian people are somewhat sympathetic toward Syria, because we know that there is a Christian minority there in Syria, and it is being under protection of the current government, because the current government is secular, so it supports and it protects all religions of the region, and unlike their moderate or non-so-moderate oppositional counterparts. So by and large, Russian public is supportive of our troops and supportive of our actions to liberate Syria of the Islamic terrorists, and to support the legitimate government of President Bashar Assad.
All right, great. Now, the complication that we see from here is always that the United States has claimed, right, that they were attacking ISIS, but didn't do it. It's a kind of a phony war. declared but then not carried out. Obviously, with this thought that eventually the CIA could turn ISIS against Iran, or maybe send them to Chechnya or someplace in the Caucasus, Trans-Caucasus, and create other problems, maybe even in Central Asia. What I'd be interested to know is, when you look at the Russian press, how prominent is that theme? In other words, the hypocrisy, the duplicity of the U.S., like claiming to be anti-terrorism, but then having proposals like David Petraeus' the United States should ally with Al-Qaeda or Nusra.
It's ridiculous, and Russian public and Russian experts are really they really cannot comprehend the position of the American elites and of some Western elites who blame Russia for our actions in Syria, who say that our actions are unnecessary, ill-prepared, and so on and so forth, or that they say that our actions can exacerbate the Syrian crisis, and so on and so forth, because we know that by far the Western support, quote-unquote, for moderate, so-called moderate opposition in Syria didn't lead to the destruction, to the dissolution of ISIS. But now, as Russia in the game, so to speak, now we see that the Syrian people, they are really happy with Russian involvement, because it gives them hope. They hope that Russia is a country they can rely on in this in the counter-terrorist actions, because unlike the West, Russia has had its own bad times dealing with Islamic terrorists. For example, I can remind you of the first and the second Chechen wars. It was inside Russia, and so we know who these people are. We know what they are capable of. We know what atrocities they are capable of doing, and so on and so forth. So it's not just for us. It's not some kind of action movie or we know this just by our own experience, blood experience, and very tragic. And so we know what the people of Syria are experiencing at the moment, and have been experiencing during the 4 bloody years of this civil war, or if truth be told, it's not real civil war, because those opposing the Syrian army are not predominantly are not Syrians. They come from abroad, they come from elsewhere, they come from Europe, and so on and so forth. So it's the gang of it's really international Islamic terrorism, and not just Syrian Islamic terrorism.
Just on that point, right? In effect, we've had all of these so-called clergymen, right? The ulema of Saudi Arabia, who have been lining up, and they're essentially declaring holy war or jihad against Russia. And what's the response to that?
Well, Russian public is generally outraged by that, by those statements. But at the same time, we have known for a long time that Saudi Arabia is somewhat involved in the terrorist activities throughout the Middle East and North Africa. So today or recently, for the first time, they have openly claimed, they have openly declared their belligerence towards Russia, towards secular Syria, and so to speak, towards all the free world. So now it was not a secret for us there, because the Saudi government practices radical forms of Islam, so-called Wahhabi Islam. And so, now they just declared it openly, and now everybody who has eyes or ears just can understand what the Saudis really are. I mean, their government.
Yes, and I think that's extremely important. Now, the last thing, I guess we have limited time. The various people in the Duma, right, the State Duma there in Moscow, have been saying that this campaign is slated to go on to the Orthodox Christmas, meaning what, January 7th in the West, I think. Yeah. How do you see it developing? Any ideas about where it's going?
Well, I hope that Russian military efforts there in the region are going to win this war, and to bring peace in Syria again, and so that refugees can come home and can once again rebuild their peaceful life and unite their families, build their broken houses, and so on and so forth. So I hope we will win, and the peace will be on these lands.
Wonderful. Stanislav, we're going to need you frequently now in this phase, okay? So please keep your Friday evenings a little bit open for us.
Okay, I will. Thank you very much.
And you said the magic word, win the war. Win. Who ever heard of winning against terrorism? We've never heard that here. That's a real new thing. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting in Washington, D.C., and now we are honored to be joined by Commissioner Marcus Mohammed. He is a commissioner of the city of Benton Harbor, Michigan. And, of course, the people in the audience know something about this through the appearances of Reverend Edward Pinkney here on the show, also from that area. But now we want to get the story, because we're coming up to an election, and that will be in the first week of November. It's going to be Commissioner Marcus Mohammed competing with the current mayor, the incumbent Mayor Hightower. So this is an important political choice. So, Commissioner Mohammed, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And how do you see the situation? What should our audience know?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for reaching out and inviting me on your show. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak to your listening audience regarding the issues, my candidacy, and the outlook for the November election. We were blessed by the residents to come out of the primary as the top vote getter. There was Bishop James Atterbury, who was a contender, along with, as you mentioned, Mayor James Hightower. And one candidate spent $25,000 in the primary. Another candidate spent $15,000 for the primary, and we didn't exceed $500. So the people sent a strong message that this election will not be purchased or auctioned off to the highest bidder, but the residents and citizens of the city of Benton Harbor are looking for substantive change and will not stop until that's realized.
So if I could, there was a preliminary runoff election, and you got the most votes in that compared to Hightower also?
Yes, sir. We came in first. Hightower came in second, and the person who was eliminated, Bishop James Atterbury, came in third. So the wind is behind us. However, we know that playing on Saturday is a little different than playing on Sunday. So the general election has a different complexion. It's October 9th at this date, and we have a long way to go yet. And it's a long way between the ground and the stirrup when getting on a horse. So we're not taking anything for granted. We're looking at it as 0-0. But the pulse and the response from the people has been overwhelmingly positive. So we do have a optimistic outlook. However, we're being realistic because we know that we're up against not just the incumbent per se, but we're fighting against, a machine that has been in place for some time. So we have to exhaust all means and measures to run a organized, legal, grassroots campaign to electrify, enlighten, and make the residents and people inspired to come out to vote for change. So we're excited, and we are up for the challenge.
All right, wonderful. Now, if it's you against Mayor Hightower, maybe you could define for us the differences on the issues or governing style or any other consideration you think is important.
Well, I think that Mayor James Hightower, has done a adequate job of management of declining affairs. However, the city of Benton Harbor is in need of a visionary and in need of new leadership that can bring about new ideas, creativity, and just a new political apparatus that will spring economic development that will not just be on Main Street, but will be in the neighborhoods where the residents and the people are able to realize the changes and the benefits of jobs, development, as well as business, which has been missing for some time. The city of Benton Harbor currently is the poorest city in the state of Michigan. Per capita, we have the highest convicted felon rate. We recently was rated as the worst city or most unsafe city to live in. The governor just recently sent a task force where the state police director, Colonel E2, along with his urban initiative cabinet person, came to Benton Harbor because we are on the most violent list in the nation. So it's clear that the status quo is not sustainable. And Mayor James Hightower, respectfully, from my perspective, represents the status quo. I don't know if you're familiar with Maurice and Dick McDonald, who were the founders of McDonald's. But when they were over it, it was not a mom-and-pop shop, but it was only in a couple cities. And it was not until another gentleman who had the vision that the brothers did not have, even though they were the founders. And it was said that the law of the lid, where there was a lid on their leadership because they were managers, but they were not visionaries. So when it was brought by another individual who had a vision, then McDonald's now, as you know, is a global enterprise. Because someone with vision took it to the next level. And my candidacy represents that. And that's the major difference between Mayor James Hightower and Commissioner Caucus.
Commissioner Muhammad, I'd like to give your website if I could, but we've run out of time. So maybe we get you back to report on your campaign before the election once or twice, if you'd like.
Thank you
so much. We'll see you soon. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. We will be following that Benton Harbor situation, and we'll find a way to get you Commissioner Mohammed's website. So a couple of other items left over from this main Syrian issue. We had hoped to bring a report from Damascus, but we have been getting some very good source reports from an unimpeachable source, and the word there was this famous air incident of the Russian plane supposedly straying, I think it's really close to the Syrian borderline, not going in, but coming into the area that the Turks claim to be their sort of extended airspace. You have to remember, first of all, Turkey violates everybody's airspace, left and right. They violate the maritime limits of Greece. They send planes into northern Iraq all the time, and into Syria, of course, all the time, to bomb Kurds, to bomb anybody but ISIS. So the Turks are one big fraud on this stuff, right? It's a lot of baloney what they're pushing. But that was the formal cause for this NATO meeting, right? This was supposedly that, oh my God, Turkish airspace has been violated. So this was the posturing of the Strangelove, the killer pedant Ashton Carter, right? This is somebody with no real military experience, right? No real historical grasp. This is a utopian. He's a utopian in the sense of Herman Kahn and the Hudson Institute and the world targets in Megadeth. So get ready. The Tax Wall Street Party is now going to go to work on Ashton Carter, and you'll know a whole lot more about him next week. Notice also the White House is leaning the other way, certainly. The White House has announced that the program of the Pentagon to train those phantomatic moderate terrorist rebels, and we know this is simple fraud, right? They don't exist. It's a revolving door. That is now going to be suspended. It's going to be over the $500 million to produce 5 moderate terrorist rebels on the ground, and all that equipment went to Al-Qaeda. A lot of it went to line the pockets of Turkish officials and otherwise just a bunch of terrorist rebels who took the money and ran. So the CIA part, though, continues. The Pentagon is giving up, but the CIA is continuing. So all those people out there, I wonder what certain forces like LaRouche will have to say about the fact that it's only the CIA that seems to be continuing with this this effort. The other thing is the White House says that they want to give money for military forces in Syria. They're not going to give any more TOW missiles, the anti-tank missiles. They're not going to give any more of the more sophisticated man-pads, right, the surface-to-air missiles that can be operated by one person and even sometimes carried by one person. But even there, the idea seems to be that the privileged recipients of the aid are going to be the Kurds. So there's a collision with Turkey coming up. So even rudimentary military equipment for the Kurds would be a good thing. Obviously, better military equipment should be given to the Kurds. The Kurds were your obvious choice the whole time. And we hear on National Public Radio and other places all of this tender concern for those sensitivities of those wonderful Turkish allies. And because they have been stabbing the United States in the back with the help of these subversives, Allen, Petraeus, and that group. So that's that I think rounds out the Syrian question. Did I mention that Ben Carson is in favor of a no-fly zone and all the rest of that mumbo-jumbo and half-baked ideas? I hope so. Hillary Clinton, of course, we know it, and you can go through the group. Another prize thing from today is that the British Foreign Secretary, speaking at this meeting, whitewashing Turkey, he says, look, we don't like Erdogan because he has these bad human rights policies, right? He jails all the journalists. He's so oppressive. But he says in the context of the neighborhood, Erdogan is actually not that bad. And remember, the most powerful argument of the warmongers so far is the drone at the White House. And maybe there'll be a security breach. How about that? Maybe the wonderful Secret Service who gave us Dallas and Lynette Squeaky Fromm and Sarah Jane Moore and God knows what else, that rash of security incidents threatening Obama, maybe that will escalate too. And if it does, you'll know, if you're a listener to this program, you'll know what that actually represents. Now, let's talk about some other issues. Oh, we have to mention, today is 10-10 day. By the time you hear the program, it will be Saturday, the 10th of October, 10-10 day. It is, of course, the Chinese Revolution. We celebrate it every year. This is Dr. Sun Yat-sen. This is the first republic in Asia. Dr. Sun Yat-sen and his 3 principles of the people, San Min Chu Yi, in my substandard Chinese, San Min Chu Yi, that is to say, the people's, I translated into my own somewhat more abstract vocabulary, but it comes down to a sovereign republic, it comes down then to a representative government, and it comes down to economic development. And it turns out that these are the points of inspiration from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address: of the people, a sovereign republic; by the people, a representative government; and for the people, or people's livelihood. That's economic development. So congratulations to the Chinese tradition of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, which we continue to value very much. Now, let's look at this trade issue. It's clear that the trade deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is a monstrosity. When it's published, we'll know exactly how monstrous. Remember also that a very good analysis is that this is an attempt to codify and legalize oligarchical principles, in other words, principles of oligarchical domination of society, and put those beyond the reach of elected governments. In other words, to put them into a kind of supranational, what can we say, an Olympus of oligarchy where the average person can't even hope to get to it. A real president would, of course, deal rather brutally with this stuff. They would reject it, and if they found it when they came into office, if they found these things existing, they would simply say, paramount national interest demands that the United States abrogate and terminate most of the provisions of these deals. And we'd go to bilateral trade arrangements on the basis of dirigism, protectionism, cameralism, the American system of political economy, the protective tariff, clearly. Now, the problem with the opposition to this deal is its weakness, obviously, but the ideological weakness, first of all. In other words, it's too timid. Hillary Clinton claims she's against the Trans-Pacific Partnership after she sang its praises on 45 separate occasions. She's obviously faking. Hillary Clinton is a faker. Then we also have to point out that the AFL-CIO, with whom we sympathize, to be sure, and Richard Trumka, their approach is totally inadequate. You can't just say no to fast track. That has now fallen. Now you got to say no to the TPP. You should have been saying that all the time. But the alternative, the 15% protective tariff, 15% tariff on all imports, unless specially exempted. Some kind of tariff wall to force companies to relocate to the United States. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just back to a previous theme. It turns out that the Russian plane that might have strayed close to Turkish airspace was actually there trying to monitor the amount of support and backup and logistics that was being provided to the terrorist rebels, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS, by Turkey coming across that 65-mile gap and other points on the border also. So now trade. The ABCs, the starting point for a rational policy is to oppose this TPP monstrosity on the basis of a 15% protective tariff and plant that idea in the world. This is not done. Hillary Clinton is obviously faking it. And then we have Bernie Sanders. And here's where it gets very serious. We had on National Public Radio this morning people saying just that. You know, Hillary may be considered insincere, right? She may be faking it. She may be lying. But when it comes to Bernie Sanders, he's the real deal. Well, what we find with Bernie Sanders is that he is not the real deal. And the point with this is the following. The tactics, right? We've challenged Bernie Sanders a number of times to do things. We've been challenging him now for some weeks to break with the reactionary monsters of the Saudi royal family. You know, those guys who just declared jihad, holy war on Russia. That's the kind of thing that could start World War III right there, assuming the U.S. honors this non-existing alliance, but I'm sure verbal commitments of all sorts to Saudi Arabia. So we say to Bernie, the Saudis are committing genocide in Yemen. You've got to condemn them. Oh no, not Bernie. Bernie thinks that the Saudis ought to be the dominant force in the Middle East. They've got to get their hands dirty. Well, their hands are bloody and dirty enough. But now, Bernie, we're going to give you another chance. Bernie, we want you to filibuster the trade deal. Anything that goes through the Senate can be filibustered. In order to shut it down, people have to vote. Yeah, we saw these publicity stunts by little Rand Paul, by Ted Cruz, by others, by Mike Lee. Those guys go and do the talking filibuster, right? The Mr. Smith goes to Washington. And it means you stand on the floor and you stand up there and you keep talking for 12, 18 hours as long as you can hold out. Bernie, that's what we want you to do. And if you don't do it, you're not the real deal. So now we have a two-pronged demand on Bernie. Time to condemn genocide by Saudi Arabia, Bernie. And the second one is, Bernie, you've got to filibuster the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a monstrosity, Bernie, but we want to see you fighting, not just talking, because we think that you may be the controlled opposition. That's the kind of thing that we get. Now, on the other side of Capitol Hill, we have the House of Representatives, right? Now, here we have the fascists versus the reactionaries once again. That is to say, it comes down to the fascist Freedom Caucus against the mere reactionaries of the Tuesday Club. Those are the more moderate ones. But, of course, they're all crazy, right? They're all guaranteeing Chinese world domination and the ultimate defeat of the United States. So this is a bad thing. We don't want madmen 2 heartbeats away from the presidency, and that's the Speaker of the House, right? You're 2 heartbeats away from the presidency of the United States. Now, so far, the principal candidate is Jason Chaffetz. He's a Mormon fanatic. My prediction, once again, is based on my exhaustive evaluation of the LDS in the book on Romney, that is to say, just too weird. Bishop Romney and the Mormon takeover of America with polygamy, theocracy, and subversion. Chaffetz means polygamy, and of course, by extension, as you'll see in that book, the causal connection, polygamy means an epidemic of statutory rape. That is to say, underage girls forced into marriages with polygamists. We're also told that Chaffetz is a tool of Sheldon Adelson. That is to say, the pro-Israeli reactionary billionaire who has, for example, kept Newt Gingrich in the running in one of the previous cycles. Now, we have all kinds of interesting scenarios. Chaffetz has to be stopped. Paul Ryan is an austerity ghoul. We don't want him either. And he's not moderate. He's a reactionary, okay? Maybe he's not a complete fascist, but reactionary is bad enough. Now, we're told the scenarios, the competing scenarios. Should there be a short-term compromise for somebody who'd just be a time server? Who knows? Should there be a new election? Well, they probably can't be, because we're in a Weimar situation. Weimar is where you can't get a majority for anything. because everything is so polarized and the center has collapsed. That's Weimar. That's what we have now. Maybe a coalition with the Dems. The Democratic votes help to elect a speaker. Theoretically possible, but those lunatics, the Freedom Caucus, the fascists, won't allow it. You can also get an outsider. Now watch out for the outsiders. One of the ones being proposed is Mitt Romney. My God, another Mormon, another path towards polygamy. I'm sure that would be his price. And you have to ask all these guys, you're going to bring your harem to Washington when you do it? And then for the moment, the most likely, Boehner stays. This is simply immobilism, right? That the institution has ceased to function. Now, we're being told by Secretary Lew at the Treasury that the debt ceiling will be reached on November 5th, despite all the cash conservation tricks. So that means we are now less than a month away from the possible national bankruptcy of the United States and default on all international and national holders of U.S. Treasury bonds. This must not happen. The 14th Amendment says the integrity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. You Confederates can't say you're not going to pay for the Yankee Army. Yes, you are, no matter what your religion tells you, right? So you see the issue here. And of course, the problem with this is the Republican Party has to be destroyed. Need I stress the obvious? Need I belabor the obvious? This entire system is totally dysfunctional, and it's going to be time for the great winnowing, the great clearing, the day of reckoning for these lunatics who come to Congress and say, government doesn't work, elect me and I'll prove it to you. So that's the situation in the House of Representatives. I've also got to pay special attention. The role of the media. If you're dealing with somebody like Ben Carson, who says that the United States is like Nazi Germany in the sense that your opinion is crushed, or similar things, that Obamacare is the worst thing since slavery, the guy's mentally unbalanced, and you can see it. He's struggling to regurgitate the few scraps and shards of ideas that he's been able to retain about the Middle East. Try to sound like he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't. And then we have this group of 40 to 50 to 60 absolute lunatics in the Freedom Caucus. Those are fascists. And the Tuesday Club, I'm sorry, those are reactionaries. The role of the media is to try to convince you that these raving extremists are actually part of the mainstream. And again, I've said it many times. You can imagine how they would be reporting on a Nazi Party conference in the 1920s, how they would essentially try to set up one extreme or the other. Maybe they'd say that the media might claim that Goering is more moderate than some other candidates, that the Strasser brothers have certain approaches which are intellectually interesting, like Rand Paul on the cover of Time magazine, and so on, right? So that this all of the Nazi hierarchy would have been treated as contenders in the same way that they've looked at the 15 or 17 people in the Republican debates. So, our campaign against COINTELPRO stalking is continuing. You'll be seeing more of that next week and come. But for the moment, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Keep your eyes on Syria. Ashton Carter must go. Down with Ashton Carter. Get him out. And no more drones at the White House. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.
Hello?
Congratulations.
For what?
For losing all that weight. How'd you do it so fast?
ASAP.
ASAP what? What's that mean?
Are you ready to get as skinny as possible, as soon as possible, as simple as possible, and as sexy as possible?
I'm listening.
Then get with the ASAP program. It's real and it works. No smooth talk, no slick advertising, and no exaggerated claims of success.
I've got to know more.
Welcome to ASAP, as slim as possible. Whether you have 10, 20, or 50 pounds to lose, ASAP is your weight loss answer. ASAP targets the abnormal fat reserves and makes them available to be burned as fuel and contains no caffeine or hormones. Order ASAP at wholesale prices or join the team to share the business with others. Visit GCNteam.com or call 877-878-4203. GCNteam.com or call 877-878-4203. Lose weight and look great with ASAP, as slim as possible.
Don't complain about your cable bill going up and up and up. Do something about it. Grab a pencil and jot down this special number, 1-855-905-MY-TV. The more cable TV rates go up, the better digital satellite TV looks. Say goodbye to the cable guy and get more of your favorite channels in 100% digital quality for less money. Call 1-855-905-MY-TV. Sign up for packages starting as low as $19.99, and there's no equipment to buy. You get free HD TV upgrade, a free DVR upgrade, and free professional installation. You control what you watch when you watch it. Record your favorite shows. Pause and rewind live TV. Even skip the commercials. Watch local channels too. At just $19.99, what are you waiting for? Pull out your major credit or debit card. Call 1-855-905-MY-TV. 1-855-905-MY-TV. Say goodbye to the cable guy. Cut costs and get more. 1-855-905-MY-TV. 1-855-905-MY-TV.
This is the Genesis Communications Network, GCN.
News this hour from townhall.com. I'm Rhonda Rockström. South Carolina is seeing more rain, but forecasters say it's not enough to create any additional flooding. Governor Nikki Haley says the weather isn't stopping repair crews, though. They're out to assess damage to a number of bridges.
Whether it's infrastructure assessment teams, whether it's our FEMA assessment teams, amazingly, DOT, to be out there working on that 95 stretch with divers in the water and on top, the rain is not stopping anybody.
Haley says it may look like the worst is over, but advises residents to stay off the roads unless they have to be out. Let the crews do their jobs. A 4.4 magnitude earthquake registered some 90 miles northwest of Oklahoma City this morning. U.S. Geological Survey seismologist Paul Caruso says starting in 2009, earthquakes have become much more frequent in Oklahoma. They're likely result of drilling wastewater underground.
Before 2009, we averaged about 3 earthquakes above magnitude 2.5 every year. And this year, we eclipsed that every 24 hours.
So far, there have been no reports of any damage or injuries. At a press conference in Atlanta today, GOP presidential frontrunner Donald Trump says he plans to stay in the race if he thinks he can win. And according to his numbers, he can.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm leading in every single poll. I'm leading in every single state I'm leading.
Trump's visit to Georgia was his first to the Peach State since he announced his candidacy. 2 explosions today in the center of Turkey's capital left at least 86 people dead, 190 injured as they gathered for a peace rally. The explosion occurred minutes